Welcome. This is the first official post for Joy of Literature, and we're actually going to go to screen capture soon, but I just wanted to put up a video so you could see me, just put a face to the voice, and we're going to start off with reading Walden Pond. As the text entry shows, we're gonna go for it from the beginning, cover to cover, beginning to end. So hope you'll enjoy the ride. I'm really excited. We're gonna be reading it online, and I'm using a screen capture software. I show you. It's for Macs. It's a great software, and yeah, I'm not gonna be able to obviously give you every single line by line interpretation as I see it, but I am going to do as much as I can and just kind of get the ball rolling and get as much out there that I want to get out there that's in my head, rolling around in my head here about Walden Pond. I've got a lot of thoughts about it, and I love it. I think it's not only a beautiful and amazing piece, I think it's actually very pertinent to this time. It's December 4th, 2010. We're in the midst of a recession and stuff like that, and Emerson is somebody that finds wealth in ways that is a little bit different to what some people might usually think of what wealth is, and we'll definitely be talking about that. And in fact, let's get started without further ado. The first chapter is called Economy in Walden Pond. So we're going to shift over to the text, and we're going to just read it together and go from there. You can pause the video if you want at certain times so you can read the text. If you don't have access to the book or whatever, you can get copies online. That's where I'm getting this copy online. But you can read the text, for a bit, and then, go back and listen to what I have to say about it. And you can post comments. Please post comments. Put your ideas down on paper, on the blog. And share with me your thoughts. That's really what this is all about. I'm going to keep putting stuff out there, but it'd be great to hear from any of you and your ideas, your thoughts, your feelings, whatever's bouncing around for you here with this. So without further ado, let's get going. All right, so here we go. Okay, so this is the beginning of the book, and this would probably be a good time where you can pause the video. I'll just be quiet for a second. You can pause the video here and maybe read it if you want. Okay, so I definitely, if you don't have a copy of this book, I'd really recommend that you maybe pick up a copy. There's definitely a difference, in my opinion, from reading this online versus reading it with your hands in a book. There's something just physical about it that I don't think the internet will ever be able to recreate. Anyway, this is the beginning of Walden Pond. So, when I wrote the following pages, or rather the bulk of them, I lived alone in the woods, a mile from any neighbor, in a house which I had built myself on the shore of Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts, and earned my living by the labor of my hands only. I lived there 2 years and 2 months. At present, I am a sojourner in civilized life again. All right, so that just kind of gives us a background of, what this is all about. Thoreau is a very practical man, in my opinion. Just the fact that he lays out, we're going to go through this in Economy, the way he lays out, all of his expenditures, and how he gets what he gets and how he makes the physical things. So he's very cognizant of the physical world around him and time and space and how to maneuver in those elements and find his freedom within those. So, and we'll talk more about living alone and what that really means for him as we go through this book. So let's just keep scrolling down here. I just think this is a great line, if I can find it in here. Let's see. I should not obtrude my affairs so much on the notice of my readers if very particular inquiries had not been made by my townsmen concerning my mode of life, which some would call impertinent, though they do not appear to me at all impertinent, but considering the circumstances, very natural and pertinent. Okay, so like, what's he saying right there, right? So this might be like where it's like, okay, I got you the first second, and now it's all getting confusing, right? So let's just go through this line, you know, and see if we can break this down of what he's actually saying. So, I should not, let's kind of highlight this. I should not obtrude my affairs so much on the notice of my readers, if very particular inquiries had not been made by my townsmen concerning my mode of life. Okay, so let's read that again. I should not obtrude my affairs so much on the notice of my readers, if very particular inquiries had not been made by my townsmen concerning my mode of life. Okay, so now I understand what that's saying. Maybe you're getting it now too. So what he's saying is, I should not obtrude my affairs so much on the notice of my readers. So he's saying that right there is saying, I shouldn't bother you, my reader, with my affairs, the details, the kind of idiosyncratic details and particularities of my affairs, if it wasn't for very particular inquiries had not been made by my townsmen concerning my mode of life. So in other words, just this clause of this sentence, he's saying, listen, I wouldn't really be talking to you about this stuff in my own sense of things. I don't find this important necessarily, but because my townsmen kept on asking me this stuff, I figure I might as well tell you about it too, because you're probably thinking the same thing. That's how I interpret that line in terms of like modern day speak. I hope that helps you understanding that clause. And, you know, we'll go through that stuff. Eventually, you know, like I said, we're not going to be reading this whole book line by line. It would take forever. But we are just going to kind of go through this together and help you be able to insert yourself into this text and enter this world of the text, and then, you know, give you a bit of a kickstart, and then you can be off on your way. So let's finish this sentence. Which some would call impertinent. Now he's saying the which is, of course, his mode of life. My mode of life, which some would call impertinent. Now let's go in here. What does impertinent mean? Impertinent means not showing proper respect or rude, not pertinent to a particular matter, irrelevant. So it's impertinent. It's not necessary. It's almost even rude. That's interesting. Some I've heard people call Thoreau rude, though they do not appear to me at all impertinent. So he's obviously disagreeing with his townsmen. Already we see Thoreau as the debater, he's the argumenter. He's always on the opposite side of opinion. You know, if the people have one opinion, he's got the other opinion. Not necessarily as like a rote thing, just to argue for argument's sake, but he's very critical of the populist thought. You know, so if he sees a lot of people, the majority, thinking a certain way, he's going to question that and challenge that almost immediately. And you can already see that coming out here. In fact, he takes the opposite. He's like, they call it impertinent, although actually, to me, it's quite pertinent. And usually when he says that, there's some real practical reasoning as to how he sees it, a particular spin on his perspective on life. But considering the circumstances, very natural and pertinent. Now, obviously natural in the sense of like there's a pun there. Thoreau is actually very big on puns. I studied Walden with a professor who's very renowned. His name's Professor Mike West from the University of Pittsburgh. He's a Thoreau expert, and he wrote a whole book on the puns of Thoreau. But nonetheless, there's a pun there on natural, natural being, of course, he's living in nature, so, and also natural in the sense of this is almost like man's natural way of being, to deal in these ways with life and to have these ways of living. Okay, so let's go on to the next line. Some have asked what I got to eat, if I did not feel lonesome, if I was not afraid, and the like. Others have been curious to learn what portion of my income I devoted to charitable purposes, and some who have large families, how many poor children I maintained. I will therefore ask those of my readers who feel no particular interest in me to pardon me if I undertake to answer some of these questions in this book. Now, already, if you can't tell, this is all very humorous. And maybe you can tell if my reading it out loud to you. But maybe if you were reading this, just as the text on the page, you might not hear it. But I hear some sarcasm, some humor, and some irony in this. And I think it's just so great. This is kind of like that higher emotion that, I talked about in my intro video about Walden Pond. He's already poking fun at these people. He's making fun of them. It's just very funny, and I don't really know if there's much more to say about that, but you can really see how Thoreau is the guy who's going against the grain. And in fact, if we were to read Civil Disobedience, we would see much more of that coming out in that book as well, which is probably one of the most amazing pieces of literature, essays ever written, and very challenging to read and understand and to apply, but still very beautiful. This is one of my favorite lines right here. I love this line. In most books, the I, or first person, is omitted. In this, it will be retained. That, in respect to egotism, is the main difference. We commonly do not remember that is, after all, always the first person that is speaking. I should not talk so much about myself if there were anybody else whom I knew as well. Unfortunately, I am confined to this theme by the narrowness of my experience. Moreover, I, on my side, require of every writer, first or last, a simple and sincere account of his own life, and not merely what he has heard of other men's lives. Some such account as he would send to his kindred from a distant land, for if he has lived sincerely, it must have been in a distant land to me. Perhaps these pages are more particularly addressed to poor students. As for the rest of my readers, they will accept such portions as apply to them. I trust that none will stretch the seams in putting on the coat, for it may do good service to him whom it fits. Okay, so there was a lot in those lines there. Let's see if we can break this down, and I'll see how long this video is going. I don't want to take up your time too much. I don't know, I really honestly have no clue how I'm going to do this, reading Walden Pond with you and not take up all your time. But this is definitely a work in progress, so we'll see. If you have any opinions or things or ideas on how I could do this to better work with you, please let me know. Okay, so let's break this down. This is, I think, actually some of the most important parts of Walden, and that may sound really shocking to you, but if you can get this, then I think you're getting Walden Pond. So, in most books, the I, or first person, is omitted. That's obviously, speaking in the first person. I did this, I did that, blah, blah, blah. Most novels and essays are usually written like in Emerson style, and in the past are written in the third person, or, the impersonal speech. One would do this, one would do that, blah, blah, blah. And obviously novels and poetry usually aren't written in the first person, at least at this time. In this, obviously this book, it will be retained. And that's you can hear in this, the tone here shifts. We had here, in this part, here was rather sarcastic and humorous and jibing. The tone, I don't know if you can hear it, but the tone shifts very subtly, but he becomes much more powerful, and he's speaking very authoritatively and almost just like very forceful in his presence. He's making his presence known here, and there's really no argument, there's no meekness in him, in his voice. It's very strong. And that really, there's a number of different voices that Thoreau has in Walden Pond, and that's definitely one of them. The sarcasm is another, and then the soft, receptive person, and receptive to beauty, the poet of Thoreau, is probably the third main voice that we find throughout Walden Pond. There's probably others, of course, but let's continue. The tone is such a huge thing with Walden Pond, in my opinion, and it's so subtle that some people kind of gloss over Walden Pond, thinking, it's just about a guy who's in the woods and he's all by himself and whatever, likes nature. And that's just so not the case. And hopefully I'm going to be able to explain that to you here and kind of get that across to you. This is probably one of the most complex pieces of literature in at least American literature, if not Western literature.